In the quilting world, there is something called sojo, and it's the inspiration to do a sewing project. Maybe it could be a quilt, or maybe you could be sewing a bag, who knows? But sometimes we lose our sojo, meaning we're not inspired to start another quilt, or we're not inspired to make another dress, or another bag, or another garment. But we still feel the need to, or that itch to create something. And so, if you're like me, you dabble in other crafts. Most of you know me as a quilter. I do some other crafts on the side, and I figure with the holidays coming around, maybe I should actually share some of those crafts. So I'm going to share 12 Christmas ornaments that you can do, just in case maybe you lost your sojo, but still feel the need to create something. So let's get this video started. So in this video, we're going to learn to make the basic star ornament. Now, I'm not going to lie to you, this is going to be a rather long video. In fact, I think it's over an hour long. However, this video will lay the foundation for future ornaments that I'll be doing. So, without further ado, let's get started. So the ornament that we're going to make is commonly called the basic star pattern, in which it's basically triangles or squares that you fold into triangles, and there's 3 different layers. Here's the first layer, the inner star. This red star is the first layer. The green outline is the second layer, and then the third layer being this final red color here. This is probably one of the, when I started making ornaments, this was actually the very first pattern that I made. I think it might just be the easiest one. It's a good pattern to start off with, in which you don't really need any special tools to make it, unlike some of the other ornaments that I've made before. I figured this might be an ornament, a good ornament to start off with. Now, this is what the typical finished product or the finished ornament will look like. You can embellish it in any manner that you want to. And it's all the embellishments that actually make a big difference in terms of how the final ornament looks like. But this is kind of the basic one that I do. I'll just put a bow on top and a hanger. But you can be as elaborate or as simple as you want to be with this particular ornament. In this video, I'm gonna just basically show you how to make the ornament, and then maybe in a future video, because as you can kind of see here, I got a bunch of ornaments that are kind of done, but now they just need the embellishment. So maybe in a future video, we'll show you how I embellish it. Sure, I might actually show how to make this an ornament that looks like this, in which it has a focus fabric here in the middle, or a feature fabric, and you can take a look at it on the other side. But these triangles are basically the same triangles that you see here. Okay, but again, we'll probably do this in a future video. Okay, so what do we need to make this ornament? First and foremost, you need a styrofoam ball. This is a 3-inch styrofoam ball. Well, the packaging says it was 2.98 inches, but basically it's a 3-inch styrofoam ball. It's not just any styrofoam ball. This type of styrofoam ball actually has a very smooth texture to it. There is the other type of styrofoam ball where it's like there's holes in it, or it's very porous, but this is actually very smooth. And one of the things that I do like about this particular styrofoam ball is that it has this center line here. It's often referred to as the equator, and it has markings. I don't know if the light will catch it, but there is a marking here, and that'll indicate that that is the very top of the ball. And then there's the same thing where on the bottom, people often refer to the top, this top marking and the bottom marking as like the North and the South Pole. And that's actually very critical in making this particular ornament. Your start point will be, if you want it to be center in terms of the entire ball, you need to look for where those North and South poles are. The equator, that's important because that'll tell you where the center is. So that's the styrofoam ball. Again, it's a 3-inch styrofoam ball. You can go bigger, but I don't recommend you do that if you're just learning the technique. So just start with a 3-inch styrofoam ball. We're gonna do a two color star. You can do 3. Do I have one here? Like in this case, in this example, there's actually this off-white color, then there's the red, and then there's the white with the silver. You can do up to 3 colors of fabrics. To keep it simple, we're just going to do a 2-tone star or 2-colored star, in which the first layer is actually going to be the opposite of what this ornament is. I'm going to use the green. The second layer will be the red, and then the third layer will be the green again. Now, you can choose to actually have up to 3 different colors, but to keep this ornament simple, I'm just doing 2. That first layer, you're gonna need a total of 8 3-inch squares for that first layer, which is that red star in the middle. Okay. The second layer, you're gonna need a total of 16, and I'm using this red fabric. You're gonna need a total of 16 of these 3-inch squares. Then the final layer, or the third layer, again, I'm gonna use this green, and you need another 16. That's enough squares to actually cover both sides of the ornament. So you need a total of 32 different squares. Now, one last thing I do wanna comment on is your choice of fabric. Take a look at the fabric, the original fabric square here. Now, there are stars printed, or gold stars printed on there, but when you take a look at this, if I were to ask you what color is this fabric, you would probably say, oh, it's green. When you choose when you select your fabrics, go with a solid reading color. You don't want to choose fabrics that have large prints or any type of like this, for example, the gingerbread house. If I were to actually cut this as a 3-inch square and start folding it up, you lose the gingerbread house, or you can't really tell that there's a gingerbread house, because a lot of it, again, when you start folding it, you can't really tell that there was a gingerbread house printed on there. So it's not really worth it. It would be kind of a waste of fabric to actually use this gingerbread house and cut it up as a 3-inch square and then use it to make this particular star ornament. It would just be a waste of a print. Same thing with this. Okay, if I were to cut this as a square and then start folding it, I mean, can you even tell that that was a stocking? So, yeah. Well, you might, but then remember that you're going to be putting you might be putting additional layers. So basically all you see is this small 1/4 inch or maybe even 1/2 inch part of it. So again, when you choose your fabrics, you want to get fabrics that are solid reading or solid colors. You don't necessarily have to choose a Christmas printed fabric. What do I mean? Well, this particular fabric is not really Christmas themed. It was actually a fabric that was part of a 4th of July print. If I didn't even tell you that, you probably wouldn't even realize that this is not even a Christmas print fabric, or it wasn't part of a Christmas line. But because of the colors, the red and the green, you know, it kind of works for Christmas. So when you, again, as you choose your fabrics, even if the fabric is not part of a Christmas line, but it does have Christmas colors like a red or a green, it'll still work in this ornament. So again, it's 8 for the center or the first layer, 16 for the second layer, and then another 16 for the third and final layer. Now, in terms of this band, you're gonna need one piece of fabric or a strip that is cut 4 inches by 12, so something like this. Now, I actually, when I created this particular strip, What I did was I actually cut a 4-inch strip, but then I cut it the entire width of the fabric because I knew I was going to just use this for multiple ornaments, in which if you are going to make more than one ornament, that might be something that you might want to do. Pins. These are dressmaker pins in which you can get a box or a container like this. There's about 500 of them in this container. These are the 1 1/16 of an inch long. You're gonna need a ton of these pins. In fact, more than 100 of them. This container, again, contained 500 of them. This one container can probably make, I would say maybe 2, maybe possibly 3 ornaments, but each ornament, I mean, you're using over 100 pins in each of these ornaments. So dressmaker pins, just get a lot of them. I would say if you have at least 250 pins, that'll be good to make one of these ornaments. Okay, and you're gonna see that, yeah, you do use a lot of pins. Optional item, thimble. After a while, you might, well, at first when you start pushing these pins or using these pins, your fingers might be okay, but after a while, yeah, your fingers can get really damaged and start hurting. So if you have a thimble, you might want to consider using the thimble just so that you can actually push the pin into the styrofoam ball. So let's get started with this ornament. First of all, let me show you how to actually fold your fabrics. And you can do this ahead of time before you start putting it onto the actual styrofoam. In fact, that's what a lot of people do, is they will prep their squares or their fabric squares before they start assembling the styrofoam. Now, I tend not to do that, even though I probably should. Okay, but what I'm gonna do with these is I'm gonna take one of the fabric squares, I'm gonna fold it in half and kind of just finger press it down. Won't need the thimble just yet. And then fold it in half again. And press it. Okay, then I can kind of open it up, and with the pin, I'm gonna put that pin right in the center or a little off to the center. Push it all the way through. Then take the ornament and find one of the north or the south poles. And what you want to do is you want to put the pin not exactly in the center, but you want to offset it just a little bit. Okay, I need my thimble. Push it all the way down. Then from here, okay, so I put the pin in, and then I'm gonna fold the fabrics down back again in half. And I'm gonna take the folded corner here and I'm gonna fold it right towards that center line that I just made. Grease it down. I typically put a pin here on the corner on the center, right there. Hopefully you can see that in the camera. Then take the other corner here, fold it down toward that center line. Grab a pin and push it right down. Place the pin. Okay, so essentially we've taken our fabric square, folded it in half just to create, and when we fold these squares in half, we're basically trying to find where the center of the square is. You can, if you want to, you can actually eyeball this. We fold it in half, and then we fold it in half again, just so that we can find where the center of the square is. And that's where we place our pin. Then when we get the fabric on, or when we're starting to attach the fabric to the styrofoam ball, again, we place that center pin up at the top, and we're basically kind of folding in the corners to make this triangle shape. Okay, so we'll be repeating that over and over and over again. So now I got the pins on the corners here. I'm going to pin down this corner, and you want to kind of smooth it out a little bit there, and then we're going to smooth this part out, and we're going to pin down that corner. Okay, and this is where the thimble actually can help you. Okay, so that's what we got. Okay, now I already got the pin stuck on this one, and right there in the center. So I'm gonna take this now, and I'm gonna go directly across. So this seam line that I created by when I made the first triangle, there's that seam line right there. I'm gonna imagine that that seam line is gonna continue around on the opposite side there. Okay. So with that, what I'm gonna do is when I place this next square, or when I start to pin it down, I'm gonna go place the pin directly across. Right like that. And then the same thing, where I'm gonna take the corner here and I'm gonna fold it down. But I wanna make sure that it's in line with the previous triangle or the previous square that I folded. Okay. So take another dressmaker pin, and I'm gonna pin the center corner here. Pin that down. Take the other corner. Take this corner here, I'm gonna fold that down. Oh, I think I just poked my own finger. Fold that down. Okay, so the seam line kind of continues onto that next triangle. When you take a look at it, now if it does seem to be a little bit off, like in this case, it does actually look a little off. Okay, it's not exactly right in line with each other. I can basically take these pins out because it is styrofoam. I can take it out and just kind of, or realign it again. Yeah, that looks a lot better. So there we go. So in this case, you can kind of see that the seam from here goes and continues on to this triangle that we just attached. Then we can pin down this side, pin this down, if this pin will cooperate. There we go. And then we'll pin this side down. So what we have so far is our first two triangles. Now we're going to attach two more squares on the opposite ends here. So same thing, fold it in half. And fold it in half again. Okay, then I'm going to fold this one in half so we don't have to worry about this. and fold it in half again. If you want to, you can just eyeball where the center of the fabric is. I like to just kind of finger press the fabrics just so I can get a better idea as to where that center point is, so that when I stick the pin in there, it's a lot more centered. But if you feel comfortable with it, you could just basically eyeball where the center is, put the pin in right like that. I just don't feel comfortable doing that, so which is why I fold it or I finger press these squares down. But I do know for a fact that a lot of people who do like to that will fold the fabrics before they put the needle or the pin in there, they will actually fold like all of their squares or pre-fold all of their squares before they start attaching it to the ornament, and that does save a little bit more time. Now that we're going to attach the fabric to these two ends here, again, I'm going to place the pin as close as I can to the center, a little bit off-centered, right about there. Here is the fabric that I just pinned down. When I lie it flat, notice that the seam goes right across the top there. That's one way to check if you're the first two fabrics that you pin down, or the first two squares that you pin down, that's one way to check to see how in line they really are. If one is way off, you do want to take it out at this point and repin that. You know, the seam looks pretty good there, so I'm going to leave it and I'm just going to continue on. Okay, so same thing. I took the corner, fold it down toward the center. And I'm going to pin that center point down. Whoops. And take the other corner and pin that down. Now, take a look here. You see on this corner that the edges went kind of a little off kilter. Don't worry about that, because most of this is going to actually end up getting covered up. So as long as you got your center point here and you got a decent seam line going down the middle, don't worry about the fabric edges here, okay? Because that part is actually going to get hidden. One thing you do want to be aware of though is this, or when you start folding down, especially in the center, you want to look for is the white styrofoam peeking through some of the seams. I can kind of see that there is a little bit of the styrofoam peeking out right there. I'm not sure if the camera can capture it. When you do see, okay, let's exaggerate it for a second. When you do see the white styrofoam showing through, okay, just unpin the fabric and make your adjustments. Okay, sometimes you just gotta smooth the fabric out. So, okay, this is also another reason why I will pin the corners down first and then pin these corners down. Because when you have these two corners pinned down, you can still kind of massage or adjust the fabrics a little bit, especially when it starts peeking through. Okay, when you start making your ornament, you kind of know what I mean. I know the camera doesn't capture that really well here, but so I'm just kind of adjusting, kind of smoothing out the fabric, making adjustments to make sure that we're covering the styrofoam as much as possible. Now, the other thing to be aware of is, especially when you start attaching the center part or this first layer, you see how here, this corner, it's going to cover, or it's going to cross over to this fabric here. That's perfectly fine. What you really want to watch out for though is the seam here. You want to make sure that it is in fact in line with this seam here. Okay, so I'm gonna pin this one down, pin that corner down, and then again here, this particular corner here, when I lay it down, it's gonna overlap the fabric, or this square, or that triangle, I should say. So I'm gonna just pin it down. So thus far we got that, which looks pretty good actually. Then we'll take, now this one is already folded, and I can put my pin in toward the center and do the placement here. Okay, again, lining up the seam from the opposite triangle, and I'm going to fold it down, put a pin on that center corner here, put another pin on the other, smooth it out a little bit, see how it's, yeah, kind of see that it's gonna pucker a little bit, so just need to smooth that out. Okay. Then put the other pin in right there. And then kind of smoothing out the fabrics a little bit. That looks good. So I can pin my corners down. Ow. Try not to poke yourself with these dressmaker pins. I'll pin that corner down there. Pin that corner down there. And then just making sure that we're covering the styrofoam as much as possible. So I'm kind of fudging the fabrics a little bit here. Okay, but that is the center. You can choose to do one side, or you can actually just work both sides at the same time. Typically, when I'm making these ornaments, I will actually just work on one side first. Put all 3 layers on this first side, then flip it over, put all 3 layers on the second side. And the reason why I do that is because in order to match the star on this end to that end, it'll be a lot easier when you start following the seam, or when you start seeing where the seam ends. You'll kind of understand what I mean when we start doing the second and third layer, or especially when we do the third layer. That's the first, or the center layer. Let's move on to the second layer, and I'm going to switch to this red fabric now. So the first layer on one side only takes 4. This second layer is actually going to take 8 of these 3-inch squares. So I'm gonna start fast forwarding this video because the folding is basically what we've been doing, so it's nothing new. And I'm gonna actually start fast forwarding the video so that you're not watching a 10-hour video. But again, just know that the technique that I've been showing you in terms of how to prepare or how to fold the fabrics, it's basically the same thing, where you fold it in half and then fold it in half again. Okay, so let's start fast forwarding, and when I'm ready to start pinning these fabric squares back to the ornament, I'll show you what we do. So I went ahead and actually pre-folded all of the rest of the fabrics that we're going to need to complete the ornament so that I'm not pausing. So that's what all of these stacks are here. Now we're on to the second layer. So we started with the green, we're going to switch to the red. And again, I folded these squares the exact same way as you saw me do before, where you fold it in half and fold it in half again. I'm going to stick a dressmaker pin right there in the center of the folded lines. Now, where I put this in, this is kind of where having these seams go kind of in line with each other. This is kind of where it starts to get important, because as you start putting the second and third layer, you're going to use those seams to kind of help guide you as to where you're going to place or that next layer. So I generally go about 1/4 inch down, and 1/4 inch for me is actually the width of this thimble. So I just use the thimble and kind of eyeball. Okay, 1/4 inch is about right there. Well, that's actually a little bit bigger than 1/4 inch. So again, I just use the width of this, the top of this thimble, and I just place it down there. And that's where I put the pin, or that's how I measure, I should say. And that's where I start the next layer. So it's the same thing where I'm going to layer it down and then fold this corner down toward the center. Put that there. Then take this corner, fold it down, put that there. And then you still want to check to make sure, and this is, well, that pin is not all the way in. So you still want to make sure that your seam is kind of in line with each other. Going from the first layer to the second layer. And then we can pin the triangle corners down. Right there. Okay, so that's the start of the second layer. Now I'm going to do the same thing again to the opposite side. So measuring about 1/4 inch. Oops. Okay, I'll put my pin in the center. Take the next fabric, put this fabric square, put the pin in the center. And then on the opposite side now, here, I'm gonna measure it again, and then, so it should go right about there. Now before I start pinning everything down again on this second fabric square, I'm gonna take a look. Is the distance here pretty even, or is it about right? Looks to be about right. Okay, so then I can take the corner, fold it down, pin that corner down, take this corner, pin that down. Okay, then we pin the side corners down. Okay, so thus far, this is what we have. Okay. Then the next two fabrics, or we'll do the next two sides, same thing. And I'll take a pin, pin that down. Okay, we're gonna measure it. So it's about there. Okay, does that look even? Looks even to me. So we'll take this corner, pin it down toward the center. And we'll take this opposite corner, pin that down. Okay, still checking to make sure that we got the seam in line. We'll pin the corner triangle, or the corners of the triangles down. Then the last one, we'll put the pin in the center, measure about 1/4 inch down, so it's about there. Here we go. We'll put a pin in that center corner, put the next pin. After when you start doing this for a while, you get a lot faster at this. And the very first ornament that I made in this style took me about an hour. A lot of it had to do with the fact that I just was not getting my seams aligned correctly. But after a while, it starts to go a lot faster. One thing really that I do like about making this particular ornament is that you can take this on the go. Let's see, do I have it? You know, so a lot of times I will put everything in like a Ziploc bag. I'll take the styrofoam ball, take the pins, my thimble, have all the squares already cut and prepared, and I'll put it in this like a Ziploc bag. And if I'm going somewhere where, you know, if I'm waiting at like a doctor's office, or if I'm gonna go somewhere where I'm gonna have a lot of wait time, I'll take these ornaments with me, a so-called kit with me. And as I'm waiting, I can actually work on one of these ornaments. We got the first 4 fabric squares on that second layer. Now we're gonna attach the next 4, but we're gonna do it in these in-between spots here. And this is where we start to see the formation of the star. Now, if you don't wanna make a star and you just wanna do this pattern, this is actually a pretty cool pattern too. You don't necessarily need to make the star, and if you wanna just leave it like this, that's perfectly fine. But we are gonna do the star pattern. So same thing, in which I'm gonna line it up. But this time I'm going on that seam where it's the seam is actually the seam between the 2 different squares from the layer 1. So but it's still the same thing. Now, one trick that I have learned is that in between these 2 points, that red fabric here and this point here, I can stick the pin, and instead of measuring with the thimble, I can actually basically just kind of stick the pin right there. And then when I fold up, okay, so you see how the top of the fabric, of this fabric that I just pinned down, it kind of lines itself up with the previous 2 fabrics. So that's one way of actually not having to measure it. That's usually how I kind of locate the spot as to where I'm going to put that pin. Folding the corner down, making sure that we're still following the seam lines there. And I'm going to put a pin here. And then fold this corner down and place the pin there. Okay, so you can kind of see the start of the star point there. So again, when placing the fabrics in between, you can use these 2 points as like your guide. Then you can start and pin the point there and just kind of make it even. Okay, so that's the start of our star point. Okay, so now we'll do the opposite corner here. Okay, so same thing. I'm gonna make it match to where the 2 points are. So this point here, and there's this point here, and then this point here. I'm gonna place the pin right on that seam and sort of in line with those 2 points. Fold it down. Okay, now when you start doing the second or even the third, more so the third layer, because you're going through so many different layers of fabrics, these pins get a lot more difficult to actually go through. So that's where the thimble actually really does help. That first layer, because it is the first layer, there's not as many fabrics. But when you start getting to the second and especially the third layer, they get a little bit more difficult to actually push through. There's the start of our star. Now, you could, again, leave it like this. This is a pretty cool design, but we're gonna complete the star by adding the last 2, line it up. Right about there, yep. Okay, and pin the center, pinning the center down and pinning this part down. So now there's a lot of layers that I'm going through with these pins, so it's getting a little bit more tough to actually push these pins all the way through, but the thimble, again, does help with that. Okay. So now we have our star center. Now, when you look at the star, for example, notice that at certain angles, the star looks a little distorted. So for example, if I turn it like this, it sort of seems like the 2 points here are a little bit longer than the other 2 points. Now, I typically just don't care about the symmetry of the star. As long as you can kind of get the general star shape, that's fine with me. I do tend to notice, though, if it's really off, whereas in one star leg is maybe a 1/4 inch or even longer than that, I will, again, if it bothers you, you can kind of take off each of these squares or the triangles and then just repin it on. But typically I kind of notice that if you rotate it, like this star point or this green star point there is actually a little longer than the rest of them. I'm not going to worry about that right now, but because no one's really going to notice that. But if you want to fix your star, especially the center star, now is the time to actually take out the fabrics and repin it on, because once you get that third layer on, and then you notice, hey, your star didn't come out or isn't quite right, yeah, you're gonna have to take all of that off. Before we go on to the next layer, I usually just kind of check, hey, does the star look okay? And if it does, then I just continue on. But if it's gonna bother me, then at this point I will start taking out some of these squares. In fact, yeah, this looks pretty good. Okay, so now to the third layer, and we're going back to the green. So same thing, just like how we did that second layer. putting on the third layer is the same thing, where I'm gonna put the pin here in the middle for a second. Then I'm gonna put the pin, or I'm gonna place it again. Now, when we attach that second layer, or the red, that second layer, I measured using the thimble. I measured from the center out. And then that kind of gave me an idea as to where to place the pin. So now that we're on the third layer, I'm gonna take the point of one of those red fabrics, or the red triangles, and I'm gonna measure from there. Again, this thimble is about, it's about a 1/2 inch wide or so. So I'm gonna place it right there. Okay, so the thimble is just a way for me to actually keep the distance in terms of these points. In terms of these points, it's just a way for me to actually measure and keep it consistent. It doesn't matter if you want to go 1/2 inch between, 1/2 inch wide between layers. You can go 1/4 inch wide between layers. The distance in between the layers is not as important. What is important is that you keep the distance consistent. So instead of me taking out a measuring tape, I mean, I could very well take out a measuring tape and then just measure the distance between the center point, measure the distance between this center point and the next point here, or where I start the next layer. I mean, this distance is what needs to be consistent. Now, it's about between the first layer and the second layer, I started that about 1/2 inch or so. Again, I could have gone 1/4 inch, but I'm choosing to just do it as a 1/2 inch. About a 1/2 inch away, so. Okay, so same thing, the start of the third layer, I'm choosing to go about 1/2 inch away, and I measured it from this point on the red fabric here, or on the second layer, and then went about a 1/2 inch down, and then started the third layer here. By the time we get to the third layer here, because of the distance that I've been putting in between the layers, we're starting to hit the equator of the styrofoam, which is fine. Now, if we go past the equator, that's fine. All of this, whatever ends up being on this equator, it's gonna get covered up by the band that we do. So don't worry about this not looking very pretty. It's gonna get covered up anyway. Okay, and then the technique is still the same. You fold to make your triangle, and then you just double check to see that the seam line is running consistently across. Then we can fold down our corners. Okay, and so there's the start of the third layer. So I'm gonna do it on the opposite. Now, one thing I should mention, okay, when we started the second layer, we did the first 4 squares, then we did the next 4 squares in between. When you start the third layer, you want to start it using one of the first 4, not on the second 4 that you laid. Okay, so what do I mean by that is here, this one, this one, this one, and this one. Those are the first 4 squares that I laid when I started the second layer. How do I know that? Because it's the one that's underneath. This overlaps that, so I know this was part of the second round. Now when I start the third layer, I want to choose one of the first original 4 of that second layer. So that's what I mean. You could very well start on using one of the second 4 on the second layer, but I just find it's a lot better because of, I guess, for consistency, or it just looks overall better when you do it, or when you start that next layer using one of the first 4. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Then from here on out, it's basically the same thing as when you attach the second layer. So I'm gonna go across and then measuring it away, so it's about there. Okay, when you lay down the second layer, you want that, you kind of wanted the distance to be really, really consistent, because the formation of the star can get distorted when a fabric is too far up or too far down. But when you start getting to the third layer, it's not as important. You can kind of more or less eyeball it. I still measure it using the thimble, but it's not as important, and you can kind of really eyeball this particular layer when you place the fabric down or pin the fabric to the styrofoam. So at this point, we can start to fast forward because we're not doing anything brand new. So we're just kind of continuing on with the same process. So let's start fast forwarding this. So we got half of the ornament done, and this is what it looks like thus far. So now we're gonna do the exact same thing on the other side. And so if you want to make sure that the star here lines up with the star on the other side, that's where the seam guides, or that's where the seam lines will help you determine where to place down your fabrics. But if you don't care that this star does not line up with that star, or it's not totally in line, like here, for example, let's see. Yep, this ornament. Well, maybe not that ornament. Let's see. This star is actually not in line with this star, but you don't really notice it. So if you don't really care, you know, you can just go ahead and start this second side exactly the same way that we did this side. Okay, but in certain instances where, like in this, here we have the gingerbread facing this way, and we have the house. You know, you want to make sure that it is in the same orientation. Then that's where these seam lines on the triangles can actually help you line it up. Okay, but we'll go ahead and do the second side. It's basically the same thing as the first side here. So I'm gonna go ahead and complete the second side, and when we're done with that, we'll come back. Completed both sides of the ornament. The technique for making the second side is basically the same as making the first side. Notice that the star points from side 1, or the first side, if I follow the seam line, it doesn't quite match up to the star point on the second side. But when you look at the ornament, you know, it's not like you can really tell. That's not going to bother me. But if that is going to bother you, then by all means, just make sure that when you do, or when you start that second side, or from the first side that you did, just follow that seam line all the way down. Then you can kind of get a general feel for where you should start your first layer on the second side. Okay, but something like that, I'm not gonna worry about it. But on an ornament like this, Now here's the gingerbread. Now notice that it is facing right side up here, and then on the second, on the flip side, if I had the gingerbread house in the opposite orientation, then that's something that is going to be noticeable, in which then I would actually go ahead and fix that. But again, on this star ornament, if the star is facing one way and then the other side, the star is facing a different way, nobody's really going to notice that. So the final step in actually completing, at least making the ornament, before we start embellishing it, is actually to put on the band. Now the band is actually to just kind of cover the seam between the two sides. Here I have a strip. This was a 4-inch strip cut by the width of the fabric. Now I cut it the width of the fabric because I knew I was going to be making multiple ornaments. But if you're only going to make one ornament, you need about, at least, I would say 12.5 inches. And basically it's enough fabric to kind of wrap itself around. Or maybe, how big is that? Maybe that's 6.5 inches. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yeah, so if you go with 12 inches, that'll be more than enough. Now again, it's a 4-inch strip cut by 12 inches. And what you're gonna be doing is you're gonna, on the wrong side of the fabric, you just folded it. I folded it in half. And you can, you could iron it, but I'm just gonna finger press it for now. Then open it up and then fold the edges of the fabric to that fold line that you just, or that fold center line that you just made. Okay, so basically we're just folding in the edges of the fabric to the center. And we're gonna flip it over. Okay, now depending upon how close your pins are here, the basic idea is that you're gonna take this band and you wanna just cover up the seam so that you're hiding all of the pins and all of that ugliness in there. Okay. Now this is a little wide for me on this size of an ornament. Now, so what I'm gonna do is then, so we have our edges folded toward the center. I'm gonna fold it in half again. So it's a little bit more of a skinnier band. I have to make sure that this band is actually going to cover everything, or cover all of that ugliness that's at the seam. Okay, so what we're looking for is, you see, like right there, there's a pin that's sticking out. I have to adjust it so that it'll cover that. But when I move the band one way, I have to make sure that on the other side of it, we're not exposing yet another pin, in which I am here. So we'll just adjust it. Looks like this size is actually gonna be okay. So I'm gonna go ahead and snip this. Well, before I do that, okay. One thing you wanna do is just to make sure that you want to determine which is actually going to be the top of the ornament and which is going to be the bottom of the ornament. And I'm going to say that this will be the top of the ornament, simply because I know that this particular star is a little, well, it's not perfect, but it doesn't look that bad when I hang it, or if it were to hang on a tree at this angle, it's not going to look that bad. So I'm going to consider this side to be the top here. And I'm going to start wrapping the band. I'm going to place a pin here. Now you can do 2 pins, 1 on each corner, and use your thimble, because this is going to be a hard section to actually get down. There we go. So you can do 2 pins, 1 on each corner, as I am doing here. Or you could just very well do 1 pin on the center there. Okay, but I'm doing 2, and I'm gonna wrap the band around the ornament, and then just making sure that we're covering all the pins and we're not exposing all of these pins here. We're gonna make sure that the band is gonna be enough to cover all of that. And then I'm kind of pulling it a little taut too. I'm not like trying to cinch it in half, but I am kind of making sure that it is a little tight around there. Can't find my scissors, so I'm just going to use this rotary cutter here. And I'm just going to simply, oops, maybe I should go from this side. Right there. Now you do want to make sure that the band, when you got it wrapped around, you're overlapping a little bit. You don't need a lot of it, but just enough to cover your first 2 pins there. Put a pin here. And put a pin here. And so just to make sure, I'm just double checking to make sure that none of the pins are exposed unless they're at the top here. If you want to place other pins throughout the, oh, there's a pin that got exposed there. So I'm going to just shift this a little bit over. Now, if you do want to place some extra pins, maybe sometimes I put a pin, here's the top. Sometimes I'll place a pin right there on the center. You can go ahead and do so. But just remember that we still have to embellish these ornaments. And so a lot of times I will use pins or decorative pins to just kind of embellish the band. But it also helps to kind of secure the band from shifting around. That completes the ornament. At this point, then we can start embellishing the ornaments, and as you can kind of see here, let me shift the camera for a second. I do have a number of these ornaments where it does have to be embellished, or I started some others but haven't completed them. Here's where I actually started one side, got the first layer down, and then started the opposite side, got the first layer down. So I'll be finishing these up. At this point, this is what your ornament is gonna look like. We'll do a separate video for how I embellish it with pins, sequins, or whatever other things that I can find. Well, thank you so much for your very, very long attention. Now, there will be a part 2 of this video where I start to show you how to embellish these, or how I embellish these ornaments. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Put a comment down below. Let me know what you liked about the video and, well, what part of the video I should improve on. Join the Facebook group at Treasure Heart Creations. And if you're on Instagram, hey, post a picture of the ornament that you made using the hashtag THC12ChristmasOrnaments. Well, that's it for now, and until next time, go out and create something.